Okay, hello class. Today we're starting the topic of reverbs. What reverbs are, how do we use them in a session. I want to explain the psychoacoustics behind using a reverb to create and develop depth. Part of this is for you to be able to utilize reverbs when you're mixing to create a stage upon which you're going to build this entire mix. How I was taught to mix and apply reverbs was from a point of you first have to envision the stage upon which this song is going to happen. Meaning, is this a punk garage band and it should sound like it's playing just at a small club? Or is this a big rock anthemic type of song like We Will Rock You from Queen? And then this should sound like it's on a huge auditorium or concert hall, and you kind of hear the reflections of the big space. Mismatching those reverbs with the type of song that you're mixing can take away from that performance. Um, would would we will we will rock you or we are the champions that both have that kind of slap reverb going around? Would that feel the same way if it was a just a very tight small room? I don't think it will. It would, right? Okay, so part of all this is developing and understanding uh, staging in this sense. Okay, so let's start by explaining the Haas effect. Does anybody remember from psychoacoustic class what is the Haas effect?
No.
No? Okay.
I can't remember it. I know, but I can't remember the good definition of it.
Okay,
I think I'm sorry. I
go for it.
think is it like the position of the ear, like what is it cover? Like what part of the ear receive what sound, so it gave you the direction of the sound.
Isn't it more just of like the perception you get of the sound from where it's
Yes.
coming? Um, that's just the most I know I can get like from the top of my dome.
Okay.
Vernacular of the vernacular of it.
You're both hitting on different topics about it. Okay, so let's go by the textbook definition. Haas effect is a psychoacoustic phenomenon discovered by Dr. Helmut Haas in 1949, also known as the precedence effect. The law states that when one sound is followed by another with a time delay of approximately 40 milliseconds or less below humans' echo threshold, the two are perceived as a single sound. This relates to how we determine spatial location by sound because two noises with a very short delay between them are perceived as one. Spatial location is determined by the first heard dominant sound regardless of where the second one came from. To summarize, we determine the source of the sound base as on what arrives to our ears first. Any subsequent reflections or noise arriving after a short delay give the sense of depth and spaciousness and do not appear as individual sounds as long as it's within that 40 milliseconds. There's another aspect to this Haas effect when you really get into the study of it, that the loudness of each source has a lot to do with how the Haas effect works, how the precedence effect. Because normally what you hear is here's the source, that source bounces off of a wall, gets back to you, and that that time delay creates that precedence effect, the Haas effect, but there's also a loss of energy because that sound hits that wall, and as it bounces off, some of that energy is transmitted onto that wall and some of it is reflected back, right? So that loss of energy means also that the reflections are going to be slightly weaker in perception, sound perception, right? But so it's a form of energy as well as the delay, and I want to express that because later on I'll delve into a couple of things that you can do to and play around and trick how the Haas effect works as far as our perception. Okay, so that means how I tend to explain this in class. Let's say Erica has the chair in the middle of the classroom, and I'm standing directly in front of Erica. And then you have William and Sering on one side, Vrishti and James on the other side. That's just how it shows up on Zoom for me, so that helps me. Okay. As I'm talking, my voice is arriving to both of Erica's ears at the exact same time. That tells her brain the professor's in front of her. But Vrishti and James, my voice is getting to their to their right ear first. Then sound has a fluid property, much like light, that it kind of bends around their face and arrives to their left ear slightly later. That time discrepancy tells their brain the professor is to the right of me. Opposite would be for Williams and Sering. My voice is going to get to their left ear first, bends around the face, and a slight time millisecond later is going to arrive, and then they're going to get the cue of professors to the left. In all simplicity, that's what the Haas effect explains. Then we extrapolate that a little further on, and now we start visualizing that my voice doesn't just stop at everybody's ears. My voice keeps reflecting within the room. And if I was in a classroom that would not have all this absorption material, my voice would reflect on the wall behind Erica. And then that reflection would move back and Erica would perceive the reflection behind her. James and Sering, who are the farthest out, would also hear my voice get to their left and right ear, the ear that's away from me. They will hear my voice bend across their face and get to their ear, but they will also hear my voice bounce off of the wall that's closest to that ear and arrive slightly less. That gives them a sense of boundary, which also gives a sensation of depth, meaning you are within this depth within this room. So all these reflections that are micro or milliseconds apart from each other are all part of the Haas effect, then also create not just direction, but how we perceive depth. Anything past that 40 millisecond now starts sounding as a slight flammed slap echo. Okay, that 40 milliseconds, if we kind of extrapolate that into what roughly 1 foot to milliseconds converts to, which is about 11 milliseconds. So we can help determine distance that way. We can know if we're in a dark room, we can walk in and we can talk and say, this sounds like a bathroom because how small and reflective it is, and then walk out of the bathroom into a living room, and then we can hear that my voice carries up, above, and away and in front of me for 10, 15 feet, 10 feet and maybe 12 feet above me, and now we've changed into a spacious environment just by those reflections of the Haas effect. You like this class? Okay. Good to hear that, Sarang. Glad you guys are kind of getting this. So keep that in mind as we're working through defining depth, creating depth. Okay. Make sure I'm not missing anything. So, let me copy this onto the chat so you guys can read up a little bit more. And they are proposing an example of creating creating the Haas effect with a plugin. So I'm going to actually do that in this class on my Pro Tools session. So I'm going to go over here and let's start with this guitar. This should be here. Okay, let's hear this guitar. So when I recorded this guitar, I recorded it with a couple pedals. There's a verb pedal and there's a delay pedal. I believe I put the delay pedal first, then the reverb. So, and there's a bit of a blend with that delay, so you're hearing some of the guitar going through the reverb, but then that delay is also going through the reverb. So there's a nice smooth movement. It's nice and sparkly, and you just hear it moving backward in time. But since this is a mono recording, meaning I put one microphone and I'm treating it as a mono, there's actually two microphones, but I didn't record this as stereo because it's only one driver. So there's a mono source, and I didn't do a room mic to create any stereo environment. So this is a mono source, and there is no real depth to this mono source because you need some stereo information for that. So within the context of this arrangement, if I was to play the rhythm guitars that are happening at the same time, we're hearing that all three guitars sound flat, meaning it's two-dimensional. I hear movement up and down because of their frequencies and arrangements, and I hear left and right movement, but I hear no depth because these are three mono sources. So, as is, I'm having a little bit of an issue on figuring out what to pay attention to. And all three parts are very interesting, but they're all calling to my attention and they're all in my face. So you can start using depth effects based on the Haas effect and reverbs to start shifting things within this stage. One of the comments I get a lot about reverbs is that as soon as you apply a reverb, it masks that sound and pushes it back and smears it. There's an effect, there's a result of adding that reverb that it loses that energy, that clarity to it, so it might bother you in some sense, which part of that is transients on those instruments are now getting extended and smoothed out. But there's also an issue with how much of those delays are happening in that reverb, and a lot of the settings that you do on reverbs can be manipulated to have that happen or avoid those problems. We're going to get into it. But right now, let's just go to the most simplest form of creating depth, which is, here is a delay. I'm going to send this guitar to this short delay bus. Let me unmute it. And on one side, I'm not delaying anything. On the other side, I am delaying it by 13 milliseconds. So the delay is going to arrive to your left ears first, then slightly later to your right ear. Let's hear what that sounds like. Let me mute the rhythms and listen to it. Suddenly that guitar is shifted. And I'm not even sending 100%. Let's go ahead and send 100% to really hear the effect. If I mute it, I'm lowering the gain a little bit since the signal's going out the same way, same channel on process. It sounds louder. So just by adding that delay, the fact that that mono signal was recorded with reverb and a slap delay, now I'm creating an artificial stereo environment, and it almost sounds like that reverb and delay that I recorded the guitar into is opening up. Out it. This sounds flat. This is taking some space, and now it's almost more enticing. Let's hear it with the instruments. Notice that now it's set apart from it versus flat, two-dimensional. Three-dimensional. What are you guys hearing over there? What do you notice tonally and everything else?
For me, I think like I agree with you in what you're saying. At the same time, it's like I feel like some notes made more sense when the delay was happening. Like it was more pleasant to hear. Besides just the fact that actually was creating a space, like you, as you said, like you could feel distance between the actual song, and it's not like the guitar is like, yeah, look at me, like I'm here, just focus on me. It's not like prop playing. So
Okay, Sarang agrees.
Yeah, I agree. The piggyback is the guitar feels a little more flamboyant, and it feels a little more like relative to the key of whatever that the other that like is it the bass that's holding it, like the steady dun 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 dun.
Yeah, the other two rhythm guitars. Yeah.
Yeah, the other two rhythm guitars, it feels almost like it felt like it wanted to shift tonally more for me, but it's like, no, we got like a couple notes just to make sure that we don't completely compete with the other rhythm guitars.
Right. And that's important because now it doesn't feel like it's competing with the other guitars. Now it feels like it's somewhere else, set apart within the stage, and you can now clearly hear the ad-lib guitar versus the two rhythm guitars. Go ahead, James. What were you going to add?
No, I was gonna comment that I really like the effect that it gave, basically like changing the perception of how the guitar like reached you. Like
Mm-hmm.
it the effect that you gave it, it felt as if it started at one at a point and ended on another. And I think that that made it as you said, like go distinguish itself from the other guitars.
Yeah, absolutely. And notice that there's a bit of a shift upward. Tonally, it almost sounded like it got brighter and then it went up in height. It's here, but now it's up here. So that adding of those reverbs and delays are shifting the perception of that instrument. In part, is comb filtering happening with this delay? Since we have a fixed delay of 13 milliseconds, this fixed delay is going to affect that frequency's wavelength. Whatever frequency is 13 milliseconds, that wavelength is going to have a phasing issue with the original source and all the harmonics up to it. So you're going to have comb filtering, meaning you're going to have that frequency being carved out a little bit, notched out a little bit, and the next harmonic down a little bit also, and all the harmonics depending on the strength of and loudness of this. So part of that coloration that's happening is the comb filtering. So if we change this to 23, slightly different. Back to 13. Three. Now it doesn't sound as bright. Now it sounds a little heavier, darker, and now it's sitting lower. This is the problem with not understanding acoustic treatment in your mixing room, not understanding acoustic treatment within a tracking room. Reverb also is a tone setter. One of the reasons we try to record things as dry as possible is to avoid that interaction during the recording process, so then later in mixing we can impose whatever tonal shift we think it needs with the reverb or delays that we want to add to it. And if you notice how this whole course has progressed, I've gone through topic after topic after topic, and all topics go back to how each of those tools affect the tone. The reason I started with EQ is because it is the easiest tool for you to hear tone change. Compression gets way more complicated and gets way more involved for you to develop that critical listening, but you guys were able to hear those tone shifts. Now we get to reverb, which is hearing and understanding tone shifts in a different way than the other two tools. But I think it's easier for you now, and you guys correct me, I think it's easier for you now to hear those tone shifts and height changes um, at this point of this semester than if I would have started with reverb. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
good. So when you mix, you should start by by selecting the reverbs that you want for the song. So before you really get into a mix, start by opening up reverbs and creating that stage. Because if you don't start applying those instruments and placing them into the stage and hearing the tonal shift that that reverb adds to that instrument, then you will kind of be chasing your tail around. Because if you start by EQing and compressing and then doing reverb, how much of the tonal shift that you develop with your EQ and compression is now going to be changed or distorted because you added reverb? Think of it this way: when you're in a live scenario, you don't hear the instrument's absence of the acoustic environment. You EQ that instrument based on how it's sounding to you at the front of house as the instrument comes out of stage, out of the amplifier, or out of the PA and interacts with the room. And you make that mix sound good within that room. And if you take that exact same mix and you go to a different venue the next day, it's not going to sound the same because the acoustic environment is different. So, does that mean that I taught this class backwards? Kind of, sort of. But again, the whole point, like I explained, is I think there are steps in developing critical listening. Where should you start a mix? I still start a mix with corrective EQing. I still start a mix with subtractive EQing and some basic harmonic EQing because I need to clean instruments out. If there are problems within the recording, frequency masking, all those things won't go away just because you add verb to it. So I do some of that corrective EQing. Once I don't hear any problems with those instruments interacting with each other, I'll throw some reverb on it, create the staging that I need, and then start assessing: do I need to control the dynamics? Do I need to adjust the tones with compression, and then get everything to sit and excite the room, excite that reverb how it needs to be? Okay? Everybody following me till now?
Yeah.
Okay. So, let me make sure I got that. Okay, so let's test the theory of Haas effect that at 40 milliseconds it stops sounding like a depth information. It starts sounding like actual reflections. So we're 23. We go to 41. We can hear very clearly an echo. 38. You can really feel it pulling you to the side. But you can't quite say that is an echo. But here's what's happening. I've just made this stage wider. Because this imaginary wall is now farther away from that guitar than it was when it was at 13 milliseconds. And notice how that instrument moved forward. Back to 38. comb filtering happening at 38 is much it's at a much lower frequency, so you don't hear the same tone change. But let's hear the effects of that within the mix. 38. It sounds like there's a nice little room here for the guitar. But at 38, room opened up. You hear it just gliding over to the other speaker. Which, again, it's all how you want to present that instrument within the stage. So now, how do we minimize that coloration that happens with comb filtering? Now we get into modulation. Let's get back to the 13. You can create pitch modulations. Basically, like, think of vibrato on a singer or vibrato on when you're playing an instrument. That vibrato is creating slight pitch shifts up and down. That happens acoustically. What happens when you have a vinyl record player and then you decide to just softly touch the bottom of the plate so it slows down? You hear the music go down in pitch, right? As it slows down. So as you have acoustic treatment in a room, sound hits that acoustic treatment. That acoustic treatment tends to be an impedance. It tends to create resistance. That impedance is going to slow down those particles and bounce back, and that slowing down of those particles can create shifts in pitch. One of the reasons why when you do sound check and the theater sounds one way when the theater's empty during sound check, and then when the theater's packed, is that our bodies create modulations, pitch shifts, because sound is trying to go through us, and we distort between our clothes and between our physical bodies. We manipulate how that sound is reflecting and bouncing around. So understanding modulation is great because now you can enrich that effect, and it can sound more boxy when there is no modulation, but it can sound smoother, more pleasing, and less constraining with you add some modulation. So I'm going to just add a little bit of pitch modulation here. The rate is how fast it's modulating, and the depth is how much is it varying in pitch up and down. Without it? With it? Notice that by adding modulation, you are now creating a bit of a separation. Now you hear the instrument and the effect slightly behind it. Let's put that in content over here. So I had to put my phone on Do Not Disturb. Somebody's sending a whole bunch of emails. Okay. you hear how without the modulation that guitar sounds pushed back. With the modulation, it still sounds a little pushed back because there's depth information surrounding it, but it doesn't sound smeared. That's the issue that most people can't put their thumb on when they're dialing reverbs. They don't understand the function of modulation and how modulation can help clean and clear up that problem. Everybody following me till now? Any questions before I complicate things more?
I guess I'll ask something that I'm like kind of confused by. We're talking about reverb, right? But we're
We're
talking
talking
about
about
how
Haas effect
did it.
in general.
Okay, yeah. I was like, we're talking about how like the actual delay affects the reverb, or like I would say the stereo image of the sound, or where we perceive it at, right?
Right, and
Basically.
I'm addressing it this way because reverb delay is reverb in its simplest term, simplest function, right? Reverb is
Yeah,
hundreds and thousands of delays created by boundaries. I just added one delay, and look how much we got out of that one delay. We already created depth, we created movement, we created height and tonal shift with that one delay. So I want you to understand how much one delay can do. So then when now we get into reverb, you can conceptualize the fact that there are tons of delays and how it all interacts is part of the depth, part of the delays, it's part of the delay functions. Okay.
yeah, makes sense.
Okay. So I don't want this to be confused as this is a delay, this is a reverb. No, it's all building up to it. But if I just try to explain this on a reverb, everybody's going to be hearing just the reverb because of the tail of it. But if I just give you one delay within the Haas effect, so you can't discern the delay difference and you just hear the depth information, now you can move past that into reverb. Right? Is everybody following? Okay, good. So let's use this reverb to continue the experiment and continue explanation. This is a Relabs VSR S24. This is basically a clone of a TC6 System 6000 reverbs. One of the best reverbs out there. I want to say in the 90s is when it came out. It was, I believe, like a $12,000 or $15,000 box back in the day, and it was just an amazing reverb to create true depth because it was a true stereo reverb. Lots of reverb plugins that you use are a mono in, stereo out. So doesn't matter if you're feeding a stereo keyboard and there's left and right information on that stereo keyboard. You're feeding it into the wrong reverb, that signal is getting summed to mono and then added reverb to make it stereo, but you're losing whatever panning information was part of that keyboard. Or in the case of the example we just did, what if I take that guitar and I have that delay and I send both of those as is with that panning information to a stereo aux, and I put a reverb on it, on that aux, and that reverb is a mono to stereo, I've just eliminated the Haas effect. Because now there's no left and right depth discrepancy, so it eliminates the depth. It just adds comb filtering, right? Because I'm now adding a delayed signal and summing it. So I'm just getting a comb filtered guitar without depth information and I'm slapping reverb on it. That's another reason some people don't quite understand reverb and don't understand how to get depth, because they don't understand the function, the mechanics of that reverb. This specific reverb and others that I use are true stereo, meaning there's a left and a right engine chip in the case of the TC, right, that are generating their own reverb independently from each other. There are settings that you can have them crosstalk or sum to mono if you want that type of effect, but a true stereo reverb meaning the left means that the left and the right are independent from each other. That's the only way to create real depth. So be careful with what plugins you use and do some research to make sure that you are getting a true stereo reverb. I love this reverb because I can break down all the properties. Now, reviewing from last class, components that make reverb: early reflections, pre-delay, reverb decay. That's how we're breaking it down in this class. That's how we're going to discuss it. Early reflections helps tell the listener the tone of the room based on the materials. Are you have tile floor, drywall walls? Do I have wood floor and theater curtains on the walls? Both of those are going to reflect sound in a different way, have different frequency responses, and are going to define the tone of the room because of that. The early reflections also show the different points at which the room is reflecting. Let me pull up another reverb that shows us this. This up here is the early reflections, and you see those little spikes there, and it's showing how that room is reflecting. This room is a dome, but if I change the shape of the room, see how all this scatters, and we see an initial, the initial sound, one initial reflection, which is probably the floor bounce, because it's the closest thing probably to the microphone, and then all these reflections are the first reflections from all the different surfaces. This defines the space and defines the tone of the room, right? Then what we have here, the pre-delay, is when you have the first big cluster of sound waves reflecting as a group, and then that let me grab this the right way. That pre-delay determines what distance from the space, right? If we have a really short pre-delay, that means that the source, the instrument, is closer to the walls, farther away from you, because the sound is reflecting off the walls and getting to your ear very, very closely after the direct sound. Direct sound gets to you, and almost immediately you hear that wave of sound hitting you, meaning that thing is farther away. If the source is right in front of you, a foot away from you, and the walls on every direction are 10 feet away, that voice has to travel 10 feet and bounce back 10 feet to get to my ear for you to actually hear that pre-delay. But that's 20 milliseconds, and the voice has already gotten to me. So the longer pre-delay, the closer that instrument is to you and farther away it is from the wall surfaces. That's the other way we determine location within a room. Okay? So early reflections, and again, I can change this to something like this, and then you see those early reflections change in timing. This is time that we're seeing here, and that is determined by how the sources bounce off those surfaces. Okay. And then the last thing is reverb time or reverb decay, which simple is that what everybody tends to play around with is how long is that decay going to be. William, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I actually was asking like, what was the first thing that you said? If you could show the other reverb real quick, so I can,
Oh, the other plugin?
yeah.
Yes.
When you modify the shape of the room, what is the first timing like on the top?
It was
The
a
first
dome.
reflections, like, what I'm trying to say is like those first reflections. What do you need to modify to actually change that to the actual, like in this case, you're changing that the shape of the sound. That would be for all the reverbs, or it's just like how would you play in other reverbs? Because here you have
Oh, oh,
like a
oh,
clear
oh.
example on how
Okay.
to.
So, Real Reverb and Dream Reverb from UAD are very unique concepts where you can create the room however you want to. You don't get that with other plugins or other reverbs. You would get parameters. They would say you have 10 early reflections to choose from, and you can select those early reflections, see what you like best, and then based on those early reflections, the reverb is created afterwards. Here, you can kind of do this whole hybrid thing where I could do a dome, I could do a triangle plate, which, this is kind of like a plate verb type of thing, so you're missing one dimension. A fan. So you can switch from one to the other or somewhere in between. And then you could also, instead of sand, this can be concrete block and hardwood, or you can change this, let's say, to carpet, which all these changes the frequency response within the room. But that's unique to this plugin. All the other plugins will just say hall, chamber, and there's different early reflection settings within a hall, within a chamber, and you just play around with that way. Sering, what was your question? I can't hear you. Still can't hear you. Would it be easier to type it? Okay, while she figures out her mic, I'll keep talking and you interrupt me, Sering, whenever you can. Okay, so we're clear on early reflections, we're clear on pre-delay. So let's start hearing what each thing sounds like. I'm going to set a reverb of 1, reverb time of 1, or decay time of 1, no pre-delay. And I'll start with a room size that's halfway through. The room size determines, obviously, by the own word, how big the room is. But what is happening psychoacoustically to determine...
Wait,
Oh, there you go. I hear you.
yay!
Hey, what's
Oh,
up?
okay. Um, I had, yeah, just to see if I got it, like with the pre-delay, actually.
Go
Like
ahead.
you said, the shorter the instrument, like the shorter the pre-delay, the closer it's to the walls. That means farther from the listener. So does that mean is it gonna be like bag in the mix? Like feel like more like bag?
Yes, exactly.
That means like with a longer pre-delay, it's gonna be like up in the mix, like a little more.
More in your
Like
face.
front,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, yeah. You're literally changing this with the pre-delay,
Yeah.
acoustically within a stage. So for example, the example I like to create, saying you're standing front row center, the singer is right in front of you, and he's right at the edge and he's singing straight at you, that pre-delay is going to be very long. But the drummer who's all the way in the upstage, 20 feet behind him, the pre-delay is going to be very short because he's farther away. And what'll happen is you're hearing his voice almost dry, and then later the verb, but the drums are going to sound wet because they are so embedded in the room that you're hearing the drums and the drums reflecting in the room almost at the same time. Does that help create the picture?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So now let's hear what early reflections sound like. So we discussed size. I'll get into some other parameters here, and I'll play around with size of the room in a bit. But let's start with just early reflections. So this verb allows me to mute the reverb and control the volume of the reverb, and again mute the early reflections and control the volume of the early reflections. Serene, did you still have a question, or can you lower your hand? Okay, good. Thank you. So in this plugin, the early reflections are determined by the name of a room. So let's hear a jazz club, and let's switch from guitar to the lead vocal. And I'm going to send unity to the vocal, to the verb.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too.
Without?
Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the
In?
feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost
Are you hearing that very similar effect that we were hearing with just the guitar and one delay? Now we have multiple little delays, but it doesn't sound like reverb. You don't hear the decay of it. You're just hearing the immediate multiple delays putting that vocal in a location. So let's start switching locations now. William, did you raise your hand, or was that a false flag there?
Yeah. No, yeah. It's just a small question. I didn't see what you actually changed on the the settings here, so I don't know. I know what you said, I understand it, but I didn't see what you do on the
Reverb. So
actual plugin.
right now, reverb is muted, on,
Okay.
off, and we're only hearing early reflections.
Okay, cool.
Right. So only these parameters affect what we're hearing. These parameters that fall under reverb, pre-delay, and reverb decay, we're not hearing any of that. This is why I love this plugin, especially for teaching, because I can help you guys hear the difference between Haas effect, early reflections, and reverb. So now we heard the voice within a jazz club. This also allows me to change the seating. You could be front row or rear row. Let's hear that.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you.
It's a subtle difference, but it can make a difference on how you perceive it. Let's go to Vienna Hall. This has front and rear, and it has a variation also. So you could be like center, and the variation could be off to a side.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too.
Notice that now we're actually hearing a little bit of a slap. We're hearing him in a space, but there is some slap reflections happening there, because that means that the walls are so far away that we are hearing more than 40 millisecond delay. And again, that tells us size of the room. Let's play around with variation and position.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one.
Subtle, but it's still there. When I go to variation 1 and rear, I think I hear less of the slap.
And where can we go from here?
It sounds tighter than this.
And where can we go from here?
In this case, that variation could be they added curtains, so you're hearing a little less high reflections. How about a parking garage?
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too.
Are you guys hearing that hard reflection coming from this side and then not much from this side?
Yeah.
Isn't it weird? It's almost kind of like pressing on your ear in a weird way. There's a little bit of a phasing thing happening against this reflection.
And where can we go from here?
Change it.
I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of.
So let's put this in context. How is this helping us with mixing?
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too.
Obviously, when we're setting reverbs off, we're not going to use this reverb with the vocal send be 100%, right? It's going to be a little ridiculous. But I always start setting reverbs by sending 100% of the source to the reverb. Why? Because I need to hear in its full capacity, full splendor, how this reverb is sounding. The tone, the reflections, the depth. And if you start like most people start, that they'll put a reverb and they'll just kind of inch it a little bit until they hear it, and then they's like, okay, there's reverb, and they might touch a couple of things and then don't do anything else. You're not really hearing what's happening. Here,
and where can we go from here? I know you felt it.
You're not hearing that back and forth movement of the parking garage, early reflections. But here,
and where can we go from here?
You are. So you need to assess things at a proper level. Then when you've dialed up something you like, then you reset and then add to taste. But let's start here.
And where can we go?
This works.
I know you felt it, I felt it.
About
too.
the jazz club again.
Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know
more intimate.
it too. It's the feeling of
Church?
loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself.
Theater?
It's knowing that the ones that you've lost
like
are
that.
forever there, buried inside yourself. And where can
Oboe?
we go from here?
That's
I
interesting.
know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do.
That's kind of interesting. I kind of like that closeness to it. Let's just hear what that's doing without the guitars.
And where can we go from here?
Mute it.
I know you felt it, I felt it too.
She's doing very little.
Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself.
Let me just flatten all these.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too.
There is a very slight sensation of space, but not that much. Okay.
It's
Everybody-
like with a little bit low, like a width to the vocals.
Yeah, it kind of almost expands out a little bit and makes that vocal sound a little bit bigger, but it's still in a small confined space, and I don't really hear that comb filtering issue. So, does everybody get grasp now what early reflection sounds like and what it does? Cool. Now let's go to reverb.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do.
Okay. Let's go through the parameters for reverb. Reverb time.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too.
Let's hear. Let's go to the parameters that dictate tonality within the verb. Over here we have the reverb multipliers. It sounds like a big stairwell, like up in the Empire State Building, and you're going down, talking down to the staircase, right? Just goes on forever. Every reverb has a multiplier. What does that mean? A multiplier is dictates the decay time of a certain frequency range. TC Electronics has a 4-band multiplier. That means that from 4,240 kilohertz up to 20,000, the multiplier is this. From 4.2K to 1.5K, the multiplier is this. From 1.5K to 408, this is the multiplier. From 408 down to 20 or as far down as the algorithm lets you, this is the multiplier. What does that mean by multiplier? It's going to multiply this number, your reverb time, by whatever factor you have here. So let's go back to 1. So right now, reverb time multiplied by any of these is 1 second. But if I now go and put this at times 2, that means that from 4.2K and up, the decay time is 2 seconds long because it's time 2 factor. Everything else is below. And if I go to 0.5, that means that from 4.2K and above, the decay time is half a second or 500 milliseconds. Let's hear that.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside your soul. And where can
You guys hearing that high frequency splatter happening up there?
Yeah.
So now let's change this to mid frequency.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else.
Notice that once I lower the multiplication factor on this mid-high band, that's from 3K to 1K, the vocal almost moves forward. There's less of that smearing factor happening on the vocal. Here's another indication on how to properly set reverbs to avoid smearing.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. but I need you to know it too.
So now you're hearing low and you're hearing high reflections.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it.
And then now that vocal feels completely different in the mix. What's your question, William?
Um, would it be the same like what you're doing right now to actually EQ a reverb only? No? Okay.
Um,
I mean, it's just not many plugins to this, so that's why I asked.
I know. um, that question is tricky. It is and it is and it isn't. Um, you putting an EQ and scooping out the mid changes the energy being sent into the reverb, especially if
Okay.
you put the EQ before the reverb. But it doesn't change the decay time. You still have a long decay. This is only changing the decay time, not the energy. So you will still hear all the early reflections will still be there fully with the same energy. And for that 500 milliseconds that I have right now, you will still hear all that energy there in the same way. You just hear it shorter, which is different from putting an EQ before the reverb, where now you're sending less energy into that frequency range, into the early reflections, which then go into the reverb. So conceptually, it is different. Psychoacoustically, there's an argument to be made that if there is less energy being sent in this frequency range, then the RT60 is also lower, because the RT60 is how long it takes for that reverb to go down to 60 decibels so you don't perceive it, right? But if you're sending 5 dB less of that frequency, then that RT60 will happen sooner. Am I losing you with that explanation?
No. I get it. Yeah.
So there's an argument to be made that to a certain degree, you can achieve a similar result. Conceptually, I don't equate it the same way and I don't use it the same way, because you're not changing early reflections on one and on the other you are.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. I mean, I would say like just like, yeah, my question was basically, I know that it's not the same, like affecting the same thing, and I really didn't know about the what you just explained. Um, but at the same time, I would say like the reason why I asked that is because you cannot want to achieve just like molding the reverb to what you want, and it's like I could hear something similar to this topic, which I guess is almost but not conceptually, like you can achieve something
Similar. All right. So, for example, Lexicon, as one of the most cloned type of reverbs, imitated type of reverb, you go to time, and then I think I have, I also have the UAD version, but this is a Lexicon 480. You go to time, and you have the base multiplier, and you have the high frequency multiplier, and then you have the crossover for the high frequency, and you have the crossover for the base frequency. But in this case, the mid is only one band for the mid. The mid is going to be 1.58 seconds from 755 hertz to 3,780 hertz. That's the mid range, and that's going to be at 1.5. And the bass in this case is going to be the same, but the high frequencies is going to be 2/10 of that, right? It's going to be 0.2 of that. So that's how you shift tonally a reverb. How does that relate to what happens in nature? Again, the cloth, the material, that's all around you will affect this. If you have a drywall and it's one layer of drywall, drywall is flexible and it will damper some bass frequencies. If you have 3 layers of drywall on every wall, like you tend to have in studios, that is denser and stiffer. So now you're going to be reflecting more low frequencies because the wall is so stiff that it doesn't absorb the low frequencies. So you will have more low end reflection in a room that has concrete because the concrete's not going to absorb that low end. It's going to reflect it more than if you have wood wall that some of the sound is going to go straight through the wall. Another portion of the sound is going to be absorbed by the wall vibrating. Some of it is going to reflect. Okay. Everybody following till now? Let's hear exactly what size does. We hear and determine the size of a room by the lowest frequency that can resonate in that room. So think of size as you adding a low frequency roll off to the room. The lowest frequency that you can hear that decay happening on, which is determined by the size and how the wavelength can develop within that room, determines the size. The bigger the room, the more you're moving that roll off down. The bigger the room, the more lower sub frequency wavelengths can develop properly into reverb decay.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside your soul. And where can
Notice that then when you go to full size, there's another slap effect that happens, but it's only like a low end slap, like almost syncopated ba-bam, 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 all the way down there. And it's how that low end wave develops through the room. Versus here, you don't hear that low end developing at all.
And where can we go from here?
Halfway.
And where can we go from here?
That voice sounds fuller because there's more low end that the room can resonate through.
And where can we go from here?
And then now this starts sounding annoying because the low end is kind of messing up the rhythm of the vocal, which I hear this mistake a lot. People will pick a big size room and not, again, they don't solo the vocal, solo the verb, and crank the verb all the way up to hear what's happening on the bottom part of the resolution. So they don't hear how that low end is messing up the low end of the drums and the bass and the keys and guitars and everything else. And they just start throwing this one reverb on everything, which creates this muddiness down there.
And where can we go from
That
here?
if you just do this,
I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know
that sounds
it too.
full
It's the
enough.
feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside your soul. And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do.
Okay, what's diffusion? Diffusion, does anybody want to try define that? Or do you want me to just jump on it?
No, just jump on it. I was literally gonna ask what does diffusion do?
Okay, so everybody's heard the term, right? Especially when you're talking about studios and you need to have diffusers in the room and
Yeah.
basically what I have behind me. So diffusion um, is you have um, you have different depths within a wall, or for example, you could have a angled wall or a curved wall. Diffusion is happening where those reflections are bouncing off of the same wall direction, but as they bounce off, um, those that bouncing is happening at different intervals because there's a curved surface, because there's different depths. This sound is reflecting quicker than this one, and as it reflects back, there could be phase cancellations, micro comb filterings happening because they're different depth. Just like we saw on the depth delay on the guitar, how the tone shifted when I changed from 13 to 23, that's also happening to the reverb itself. The different ways that the sound is reflecting off of the surfaces cause micro comb filtering things to happen. It also breaks down the solid reflections. Let's put it to you this way. Best way I could describe this. You're in a public bathroom and there's a mirror in front of you. Take the whole wall on top of the sinks, and behind you there's also some sinks that have a big mirror, and you're seeing yourself in infinity. That would be a room with no diffusion. So you would have your voice bouncing back and forth endlessly. Now, you take a stone, throw it behind you, shatter the glass behind you into 1,000 pieces. Now your voice bounces back, and when it bounces back, you see hundreds of yourself. But you don't see the full picture. You don't see yourself completely in the same size. You see a whole bunch of small versions of you, half versions of you, depending where you're standing. That is what diffusion does. So as you're adjusting for diffusion, pay attention to it sounding more like a more defined singular reflection or multiple defined reflections, or suddenly it doesn't sound like one reflection. It just sounds like just like it's spreading out, like Doctor Strange. Oh yes, yes, I think I know what scene you're talking about. It just shatters and spreads out. Yes. Is there maybe I might be able to do that, William. Let's see. If not, I can stay after class at 12. Okay. So glad that example worked. I might have to find that scene on Doctor Strange because that'd be probably cool as a visual. But hopefully the example is enough. So let's listen for that. No minimum diffusion. You should hear more of that kind of past 40 millisecond delay where you start hearing a defined delay. It's still going to be smeared, but it's going to be more defined than when you take it all the way this way.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too.
All the way?
Well, I think I know I do, but I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that
Notice that when the diffusion is at the minimum, there is a rhythmical intervention into that reverb. The bouncing off the walls, again, you get that syncopated sensation and it distracts from the lead vocal. But when you got the diffusion all the way, that rhythmic intervention of the bouncing gets smoothed out so much that now the vocal becomes more front and center and the reverb stays behind.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of.
And now, of course, as you change the size, that syncopated movement could change depending how the algorithm is written. And you might want to have less diffusion if you want kind of like a cool little movement to it. This is an oval room, so you have these odd reflections. You might get a different room that's a little more square, and you can kind of fine tune that reflection. It can work in your favor. But those are things that you have to pay attention to, and those are things that you need to listen for closely. That's why you start setting your reverbs by sending things in unity, so you can hear all these nuances, so you can identify what possible problems are. So let me now play with all these reverb settings and come up with something that I like.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside yourself. And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside yourself. And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too.
Now I'm going to play around with the pre-delay and decide where do I want to place that vocal within that space.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside yourself. And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do.
All right, I think I like it there. Now I'm going to just listen to it dry, kind of do like a palate cleanser, and listen to it within the context of these instruments, and just start adding it until I think it works.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside yourself.
And now I've created a nice reverb. It's a nice backward movement. You hear that there's a separation between the vocal and the space, but there's this kind of interesting syncopated slap back to it that kind of tickles your ears and be like there's something of interest happening there. And then when you add all the other instrumentation,
and where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt
you don't hear it as much clearly.
I think I know
but
I
you can definitely
but I need
feel
you
it.
to know it too. And where can we go from here? I need you to know it. And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do, but I need you to know it too.
So you're hearing how that reverb is slightly affecting the tone. You're hearing how the vocal sounds bigger. You're hearing how that reverb helps smooth out some of that tonality, but you're not necessarily hearing that vocal sound thrown all the way back. Because I've worked those reverb settings to avoid that smearing effect. Everybody agree? Now, let's get into, and this will be the final topic for reverb, let's get into modulation. Well, there's one more thing I need to discuss, but reverb settings. So this reverb allows me to do two types of modulation. We've been hearing this with pitch modulation, with amplitude modulation. This is pitch modulation.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt.
So what is amplitude modulation? Amplitude modulation is the sound hitting a wall and bouncing back, but whatever surface is created, whatever surface it's hitting on, is changing the energy, whether it's deflecting it and dispersing it in different places, but also how harder, how loud is reflecting back at you. So changes in amplitude will also help us figure out how the room is set, the materials that are there, and can also help us understand the shape of the room. If you are hearing just a left and right bounce, like we would see in an infinite mirror situation where we just see each other back and forth, or if suddenly we're seeing, hearing the sound move back and reflecting away from us, like think of a funhouse mirror room where you have a whole bunch of mirrors all around you, so you see yourself infinitely, but you're moving away in different angles. So let's start with the left and right. And I'm going to exaggerate the depth, meaning how much of an amplitude modulation is going to happen, how strong it is, and how much we're going to hear the movement. So I'll turn this on and off, and you just hear what you're, and you tell me what you're hearing as far as movement.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do, but I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that
You hear that kind of subtle, just slightly shift left and right? Yeah? Or is it a little too subtle? Yes. Okay, good. So now let's do a front rear. So again, you're gonna now, it's gonna give a similar effect as the left and right, but basically it's gonna sound like it's just going down a hallway, and you hear the voice moving, the reflections moving away from you.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do, but I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else
Versus left
more
and
than
right.
the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside your soul. And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too.
So both of those are giving you a different sensation of the room. And how those are applied within the mix can also change the staging, the sensation of staging.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do, but I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there. And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do, but I need you.
Notice that with each version, you feel the vocals sit differently in the mix. The left and right is interesting because it makes that vocal sound wider. It pulls it out. But the front to rear movement is interesting because it separates more depth-wise. Here's a vocal and it sounds like the verb is happening behind him and away from him. So do you want the vocal to move that way or do you want the vocal to move this way? Up to you. You could have one verb moving one direction, another verb moving another direction, which comes to the point of what I'm going to be asking you guys to do in the evaluation. I'm going to ask you to sculpt one verb, then option click and drag that reverb plugin to the other to the second reverb aux and alter that second reverb just enough that it gives you a different location. So main and first thing you should do is change the pre-delay. You can change the decay a little bit and maybe change the modulation a little bit because where it's sitting on the stage is not modulating the same way as another. All those parameters are valid, but keep it close enough that it sounds like they're in the same stage but just placed differently. And then now you can determine, well, vocal, I'm going to put it with a longer pre-delay because I want it to sound closer to me, but maybe the background vocals, the drums, the brass, the violin can be with a shorter pre-delay because I want to push them back. Okay? Second form of modulation is pitch modulation.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do, but I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside yourself. And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too.
I'm exaggerating the depth and the rate so it sounds a little unnatural, but the idea is for you to differentiate it. When you have a left and a right and you have the space, you can really hear the difference better.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do, but I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself.
When you hear a left and a right movement without the pitch, it sounds like here's a vocal and the reverb is spreading outward to the left and the right, and there is a widening effect. But when you hear it with the pitch modulation, now it sounds like vocal, verb, verb. Because these two verbs reflections are now slightly modulated in pitch, so they sound disjointed from it because it's not the exact same source. You're not getting the comb filtering that's smearing and connecting these pieces. It's just far enough that it sounds like different elements creating that reverb. So that gives an even bigger widening separation effect.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do, but I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside yourself.
You guys hearing how now it's separating even more, less smearing is happening with that vocal. You didn't hear it that time, Sering?
One more time, please.
Sure. It is subtle. How to focus on this one? I'm so accustomed to it that I just hear the disconnect. I'm not sure if I can make this. Let me see if I can switch it to a faster and see if that makes it work odder, more strange, and then it'll exaggerate it more. Let's try it. Let me do it by itself.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do, but I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that
If you're hearing it correctly, then when no modulation is happening, you hear the vocal and the verb extending outward. With the modulation, you hear the vocal, and then almost like if the verb is coming from the walls out to in. So extending out from center, and then from the walls extending into center, because these are now disjointed from the real vocal. See if that explanation helps.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do, but I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone.
Okay, and then let's hear it in context again.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do, but I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside yourself. And where can we go?
Okay, so you do hear it now, Sering. Did that explanation help a bit? Okay, good. Anybody else? Everybody else clear on that? Good. Okay. So again, like everything in this class, I just put a lot of information down there. But notice we just spent 2 hours just discussing how a reverb works, from the most simplest function to the most complicated function on it, and how much we can do with just one reverb to create a space, an ultra space, and make that functionality more interesting. Okay? So these are all the things you need to do to create a delay to add depth and movement. But there are other verbs that don't fall under that category. Right? There are other verbs like plate verb, where this is a plate verb. This is a microphone. Let me just the picture I'm looking for. This is not a microphone. This is a driver. Here's a speaker that's attached to that plate, and that speaker is vibrating that metal plate. And then there are pickups on each side of that plate, and those pickups are giving you the left and right reverb of the plate. But since the plate verb is not a three-dimensional resonant space, is a two-dimensional resonant space, a plate reverb technically does not add depth to the mix, does not add depth to the instrument it's being applied to. It adds amazing color and texture. So there are reverbs like plate verbs and spring verbs and other verbs that you can use to create texture and tonal palette changes and intricacy, but are not suited for adding depth. So within this evaluation, I want you to have at least 2 reverbs that are made to give depth, 2 different types of depth and placement within a stage, and 1 reverb that is mainly for tonal aspects, which could be a spring verb, could be a plate verb, or could be some other wacky verb that you create. Do you want to have a verb that's 7 seconds long as an effect? Cool. That's a tonal effect type of reverb. So plates, springs, or any other wild type of a reverb, we'll consider those more of like a tonal verb or an effect verb. Let's give an example of what I mean by that. So same vocal, but instead of going to the TC electronic reverb, we're going to go to the 480, Lexicon 480, and we're going to go to a plate.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else.
You can
more
change the
than one
pre-delay.
inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside your soul. And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think.
But because mainly what you're getting within that plate verb is vibrations on a metal sheet that decay in a irregular fashion, that decay in a normal room, because it's metal, you'll have lots of upper harmonic exaggerations of those decay times. Those decay times on those high frequencies might be much higher than a natural decay time in a room or in a hall. And the low end resonances might be completely or will be completely different than in an actual space, because again it's a metal sheet that's vibrating. So the fact that it's so different and unnatural in that sense from real reverb is why we tend to like it. But it also is used to kind of set it apart. Some algorithms are written to add some of that depth information if they really want to get into it, but technically a real plate verb doesn't add that time multiple delays happening as the 3 dimensions are reflecting that voice back at the listener. That does not happen on plate. You do have the edges of the plate that have that's where the limit of the sound is, and it sort of vibrates back, but still doesn't quite give you that 3 dimension, because again it's a 2-dimensional space. So how to make a plate verb have depth? You could have that vocal sent to that short delay, and then go to the short delay. Oh, I'm on the wrong one. short delay, yeah. And then send that short delay to that long verb.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else. Well,
And we're only getting one reflection here, right? So let's set this at, let's say, 11 and 23. I like using primary numbers. Some habit I learned from one of my professors and mixing engineer that I worked under. And let's add some feedback. So there's some multiple reflections. Let's add a little bit of modulation on both sides. And
where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too.
And now
Well,
there's movement backwards.
I know I do.
Versus without it.
But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else
With?
more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside your soul.
And again, we're dealing in very subtle differences here, but you hear some movement backwards. We're adding a third dimension now to a, in theory, two-dimensional plate verb. Something else I do is I will have two verbs. Where's the box verb? I will have a verb that is going to give me the depth.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do.
And then I will have a box verb that is the texture and color that I want.
And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else more than the one inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside yourself. And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it too. Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else.
And I'll add this verb.
Loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside yourself. And where can we go from here? I know you felt it, I felt it.
Now the lexicon.
Well, I think I know I do. But I need you to know it too. It's the feeling of loving someone else
Now the
more than the
DC
one
depth.
inside loves himself. It's knowing that the ones that you've lost are forever there, buried inside yourself. And where can
You guys hearing that difference there? I tend to almost always use two reverbs on a vocal, one for texture, one for depth. And as the mix is going on, I will change the relationship between both. If I want that verse to sound a little more intimate, then I might just use a little more of the texture lexicon type of plate verb and very little of the depth. And then when it goes to a chorus, I want that vocal to open up and sound bigger and take up that large space, then I add more of that TC electronic type of depth verb. Same thing can happen in any other scenario. I tend to have, just like this delay, you see that it says depth delay. I tend to have 2 to 3 of these of these delays as part of my template with different plugin settings, with different delay settings, so I can place them in different locations. Then I'll have 2, maybe 3 different depth adding verbs, and I'll have 2 or 3 types of texture verbs. Uh, Eventide has amazing texture effects that I tend to use, and depending what I'm trying to go for, I'll combine these depth delays with depth reverbs with texture reverbs to create a whole bunch of palettes and give motion and movement and tonal shaping to a mix. Okay, that's as much time as we have today for class. Do you guys have any questions before we sign off? No?
No, not too much. I just someone said reverb is so deep. I'm like,
Funny. Good one, Sarang. Okay, good. Yes, there is a lot to it. Like I mentioned last class, I could spend a couple more days teaching time-based effect, but we have today for reverb and next class for delays and other time-based effects. So we'll finish that topic up next class. And if that's all, I will see you next week.
Bye, everything.